Welcome to Boogie Chassis on YouTube. Today, we're going to do a walk around on the Boogie Shop Truck. Hey everybody, welcome to the channel. This is my 88 Dodge Ram 50. We're going to do a little walk around on this thing. The exterior of the truck is pretty much exactly how I got it. Bought it from the original owner. The topper was on it. That horrible sunroof was on it. Ladder racks were already on the top. I didn't touch the bodywork on the thing at all because it was in pretty good shape. It's got its dents and dings, but overall it's a really clean truck. It had a really clean interior. The guy really loved this thing. A couple things I did do was just refresh some of the trim, repainted the front bumper, sanded it down, made it all look nice. I am running a Toyota rear end and Toyota front hub, so I swapped it from a 6-lug to a 5-lug. The rear end width is about the same, the gear ratio is almost the same. Also running a Little Shop rear disc brake conversion kit. Alright, the wheels are layered wheels. They're some weird Japanese brand I got off of Yahoo auctions. They're 18 by 7.5 plus 42 offset. They were only like 150 bucks, I think. I just bought them to try out Yahoo auctions. They look like old school hammers, but they kind of make the truck, so now I'm kind of stuck with them. For the fuel system on the truck, I wanted to stick with the stock tank. I've been through fuel cells in the past, and it's just kind of difficult to get fuel sending units working and make sure they're picking up fuel all the time. So I stuck with the stock tank. Now originally this would have sat between the drive shaft and the driver's side frame rail, but I needed that room for the 4-link and the bag on bar setup. So I moved it back here using a fuel filler that's meant for like a 40s Ford. I found a rubber piece that fit the diameter of the inlet on the tank and on the fuel filler neck. Since I was doing the tilt bed, I didn't worry about getting the fuel filler up through the bed like stock. So I knew I was going to have to tilt the bed up at gas stations. Since the fuel tank sat so low, I ended up putting a skid plate on it just to protect it. It never really gets close to the ground. In fact, the body gets closer to the ground than the fuel tank does in the end. One of the first things I bought when I started this project was a dimple die setup. So everything got a dimple die, especially early on. So I had to Z the frame. The cross member on these trucks hangs down low, so I had to raise the frame 3/4 of an inch and then fish plate the whole thing in order to get it to lay flat. I also had to raise the transmission cross member to get it up above the bottom of the frame rails. Now obviously, got a C notch. I also ran these little braces over for the factory bed mount. So the idea was that it would help brace the notch so I didn't have flex. Ran this brace across here, ran this brace over here that goes up over the wishbone and then ties in to the forward mount. That's a cross member that I built out of 2x3 square tube. I had to run it high for drive shaft clearance and clearance of the wishbone. So the suspension itself is a 3-link. Got this upper wishbone bar that's braced across here, runs up to this cross member, and has a super pivot joint in the front. Having something like 30 degrees of angle in this bar being attached here actually braces the rear end from side to side. That way I don't have to have a panhard bar. Now the truck's got a bag on bar setup. What that does, it gives you more lift out of the same size bag. If this was just a bag on axle, you've got an 8-inch bag. Let's say you've got 8 inches of travel. Now at 8 inches of travel, right on the rear end, you would get 8 inches of lift out of the bag. But this being bag on bar, you get a multiplication. So the multiplication on this setup, since I'm about halfway up the bar, I'm getting something like 16 inches of lift out of an 8-inch bag, which is ridiculous. It's more lift than I ever needed, but I just figured it would be cool to have all of this lift. I mean, the thing really gets up. It also rides extra soft too, which is kind of a good and a bad thing. Here you see another shot at the bag-on bar setup. Running Rancho shocks so I could have these red gators, kind of a 90s thing. Here you can also see a better shot at this bar. It's braced down here to the bag mount. It's braced back to this extra bar up top. So this is the tilt bed setup. There's nothing really too exotic about it. Upper bar and a lower bar. There's a hinge on the other side that I pushed as far to the passenger side as I could. Really need the bed to tilt up and away from the body so I could tilt it while it was laid out. So far it works really well. There's a limit strap with adjustable points here so I can get a little bit more tilt out of it if I needed to. Always give yourself adjustability when you're building things because you never know if you're going to need just a little bit more out of something. So this is the battery setup on the truck, using a Trail Gear battery bracket for an Optima, good solid ground, running all 1/0. Breakers across here mounted on a piece of bent Lexan. This one's for the starter, this is for main power to the truck, for the stereo and lights, and this one's for the compressors. The exhaust is all custom. Bought an eBay 2.5-inch dual exhaust kit. It's all steel and ran V-bands on everything. Some dum-dum ran the exhaust right in front of where the bolt for the 4-link goes. So if you ever want to adjust the 4-link, you actually have to drop the exhaust. It runs up over the axle, sneaks its way down past the airbag. Now at the end of the exhaust, I've got an Amazon muffler, basically a Flowmaster copy, and it runs up over the skid plate. And unfortunately for me, that skid plate was like the nicest thing I painted. I painted the whole frame, everything's coated in POR 15, but that skid plate turned out beautiful and nobody ever sees it. So this is the air setup. It's a 5-gallon aluminum tank, throttle valves to control the lift speed. Everything's 3/8 aluminum fuel line. It's nice and cheap, easy to work with, easy to get. All the fittings are steel, 37-degree flares. Wanted to have hard lines on it. Just felt like it was a good look, serviceable. You won't burn through a line if you're dragging down the road. Running ASCO valves, which are a high quality industrial valve. Seen them in a lot of power plants. We use them at the power plant I work at. Bought this remote control setup, which is really the only reason I ran electric valve. Would have preferred to use 4-play manual valve. I had one on a past project and it was super nice. But I wanted to be able to tilt the bed or lay the thing out from across a parking lot, just to freak people out. So the valves are mounted to these brackets that are bolted to the frame. All the wiring is run through the frame out to the valves. I'm also running these old school valve muffler to control the speed of the dump. Twin 444 Viers on custom mounts. Once again, there's some more dimple dies. There's the bed. So under the hood is a stock 2-liter. It ran really well when I got it. Oil was coming out of everything. So I pulled the motor out, re-gasketed it, cleaned it up, shot it with some Ford Blue. So far, it's leak tight. I put on a Redline Weber carburetor kit, which was kind of a nightmare because the instructions are terrible. Got an adjustable fuel pressure regulator for the Weber. And when I relocated the shocks and notched those into the frame, I didn't realize I was cutting out the spot where the factory alternator goes. So in order to make that work, I bought this Power Bastards 200 amp alternator. It's a 1-wire GM. And I bought this ICT billet small block Chevy alternator bracket. Now originally it's supposed to go on the driver's side of the motor, but I couldn't fit it there because of the distributor and some other things. So I flipped it over to the passenger side. It uses factory mounts on the motor that then mates to the ICT bracket. Alignment came out great, but as I'm driving, the factory voltage gauge shows probably 15 volts. So I think the thing's going to be a beast and should have no trouble with the big stereo I'm planning to put in. Since I made my life nice and difficult with the shock and then relocating the alternator to the spot where the power steering pump goes, I had to move the power steering pump over to the driver's side of the engine. Luckily for me, that's the spot where the air conditioning compressor would go. So I used some of the holes in the block, made my own bracket, and got the power steering pump in place. Belt alignment's really good. it actually had no problem. One of the most fun things about this truck was building the header. There used to be some really nice headers on the market. Sometime here recently, after I was done with my header, a company out in California started making really high quality stainless headers. I figured since I was building a header, I might as well do something interesting. Recently, for Hondas and Miatas, there are companies that started selling unequal length headers. It gives you the tone of a Subaru, which I think sound really cool. So I read on the design, you have to stagger the correct runners in length and you can get that tone. So I staggered mine by something like 25%. This thing was never going to sound good with a loud exhaust, but it actually sounds pretty cool. Inside the truck, it's all in pretty good shape. The dash is basically perfect. Kind of going for an OEM Plus style for this thing. So running an older Pioneer head unit that I had laying around, running glow shift gauges, get to see what the front and rear pressures are, and also tank pressure. A couple big scores in the OEM Plus thing were tack cluster, which was really hard to find. But another big score was a dash clock. Running a Nardi steering wheel back from my Miata days, and I also rescued Nardi shift knob from that same Miata. Switch panel, just kind of slapped something together out of some aluminum plate I had laying around. Got Carling switches, and you may ask, how do I tell them apart? Well, I don't. I've bounced the back end of this truck off the pavement enough times by thinking I was grabbing the front. And the seats are actually 4Runner seats out of like a late 80s 4Runner. Got pretty lucky finding this truck. One thing that really bugs me about this thing is the sunroof. The original owner put the sunroof in back when sunroofs were cool, and as you can see, it lets water in, and the headliner's gross. So this project took me 3.5 years. I took it all the way down. Body was off the frame. I fabricated everything. There are no kits for this truck. There's lots more to do, but I actually have a bunch of really cool projects lined up on some of my buddies' trucks. If you're interested in a bag job on your truck, or if you have like a G body or something like that, I'd like to do a project that's like as basic as I can get. Really want to see how inexpensive I can do it and show you the steps on how to do it so you can have something safe with no corners cut you can do yourself, even if it's your first project. Also, check out my buddy Evan Wells 07 on YouTube. He's got a lot of really good content that I really think you'll like. So check him out, leave him a like, subscribe, and tell him how he's doing. Tell me what you think about the video in the comments and if there's anything you'd like to see. And check us out on Instagram at Boogie Chassis, or on Facebook at Boogie Chassis and Fabrication.